Hey team, welcome back to the show. Today we are digging into part 4 of the training mistakes series, talking about pecs. Now, most women don't really care too much about growing pecs to my knowledge, but some tissue in the pectoral area is still important for function and overall structure, aesthetic. Most guys are very concerned with building pecs, and you will either naturally build your pecs very well or really struggle and will probably experience a lot of shoulder pain as other muscles, your delts typically grow a lot and you really struggle to get your pecs to grow. Now, similar to lats, pecs can be one of the most technically difficult muscle groups to train. So in today's episode, we're going to really teach you exactly how to execute better movement options, etc., to get a lot more out of your pec training. So, per usual, I'm joined by Natalie, Andrea. Welcome back to the show, you guys. Thank you guys for being here. Anything else on pec training you guys would like to add? The importance of it, how much you love it. I do think it's important to talk through, just to identify who is the biggest expert here. What's each of y'all's max incline bench? The lifetime PR, barbell specifically.
I use the prime incline press
Yeah.
once every couple weeks.
Okay. Nice.
That's
Never
the
barbell
extent
incline
of my pec
pressed.
training currently,
Okay.
but I'm getting pretty strong on it. I do think that
Okay.
having some pressing is something that for most women will have in, even though they don't care about building the pecs. It's more about the function and making sure that our shoulders stay healthy. And also for a lot of people who are kind of chronically tight through like the front like shoulder area from, typing on the computer or new moms nursing and things like that. Some pec movements to just get length under tension can be really helpful for the posture, which if your posture improves, you look better.
Absolutely. And yeah, the function part of it is so important as well for joint health, for your shoulder joint. It can downstream impact the delts. Even if you don't care about pecs, delts probably are quite important, and it will downstream impact that as well. So it's not something that we want to neglect entirely. All right, let's get into some foundational knowledge you need to have for this episode to be helpful. Just talking about pec anatomy. So the pec is a fan-shaped muscle. It covers the front of your rib cage and a bit of your anterior, aka your front shoulder. Now, the inside of the pec, like think towards the midline of your body, its origin, or basically where it attaches to, is going to be like your clavicle, sternum, and upper six-ish ribs. And then it crosses the shoulder joint to attach to your humerus or your upper arm bone on the other side. So primary action of the pec is going to be creating motion at your glenohumeral joint, basically your shoulder joint. Basically what it does is it pulls your upper arm bone across your body and also helps with internal rotation at the shoulder. So really when we're training, like when we're doing a pressing movement, the primary function of the pec is going to be bringing your arm across the body. So honestly, I don't think there's too much in terms of muscle function. I don't know if there's anything you guys would add. I think for the context of this episode, primarily just the muscle action, like, hey, basically internal rotation, and it's going to bring your arm, bicep across your body are probably the biggest things to touch on. Now, there are going to be 3 different divisions of the pec with fibers that do run at quite different angles, which is important to consider if we're trying to maximize muscle growth, because like if we want to grow, say, the upper division of the pecs, it is going to be best that the line of force, the line of pull, whatever we want to call it, is going to line up more so with those fibers. So we have the clavicular pec. Well, to back it up a little bit, basically all the fibers attached to, again, your upper arm bone, your humerus at one end, and are attached to various points, again, on your clavicle, your sternum, or your ribs on the other end. So basically, again, like clavicle, collarbone area, your sternum, and then down closer to more of our upper ribs. So based on where we're attached, and again, all of those start at the other end at basically your armpit, your upper arm bone area. So basically the direction we're pressing our arm across the body is really going to going to dictate which of these divisions we're biasing, right? Which of those attachment points, again, like your clavicle, sternum, more towards the ribs, is really going to help us dictate which division we're going to bias. So your clavicular fibers are going to be our upper pec fibers. We can think these run at about a 45-degree upward angle to attach to the clavicle. So to bias these clavicular fibers in a press or a fly, we would want to be pulling our arm kind of together and upward to about shoulder height, right? So your arm should be coming in and upward. If we get our elbow far above shoulder height, we're going to get a little bit more into our delt. But again, that path for like our upper pec would be in and upward at about 45-ish degree angle. We have the sternal pec, which is going to be our middle pec fibers. These basically run straight across your body, attached to the sternum. So again, if we were like standing upright doing a cable press, for example, we would basically just be pressing straight in front of us. And then we have our costal pec, which is going to be the lower pec fibers. And these are going to run downward at about like a 30-ish degree angle. Again, going to attach to the ribs. So there we would need more of a downward pressing arm path. You could think somewhat similar to what you would be doing with like a dip. Pretty cool too. There are a lot of similarities between the lats and the pecs. Like we mentioned, the lats in was it the first episode? Second episode we did was on lats. Lats are also a fan-shaped muscle, and they are almost like an antagonist. So we talked about like the iliac lat, the lower outer lat division, quite similar to like our upper clavicular pec. So that like stretch position for those iliac fibers where that your bicep is kind of like up close to your mouth, that is going to be kind of our short position for the iliac. Then we like go down to like sternal and lumbar, and then more sternal and lumbar, and then like thoracic lat and your costal pec are kind of like our arm down a bit lower still. Very, very interesting though. Very like in structure, they're somewhat similar. And just like the opposing like short iliac or short clavicular is like lengthened iliac is interesting aside. But anything else in terms of anatomy, function, y'all think we need to cover before we get into the mistakes we often see with pec training? Cool. All right, Andrea, what would you say is one of the most common mistakes you see with pec training?
Typically, that's going to be tipping the shoulders and head forward. So, you just mentioned the similarities to the lats. We'll usually see that like in the back of that movement where shoulders tip forward and head comes forward. Similarly with at the bottom of a press, once the arms get down into that lengthened chest position, a lot of times instead of continuing to lengthen the chest, or we've just gone beyond the active range of the pecs, we'll get shoulders tipping forward and head coming up instead of fully lengthening the muscle. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. So you could say like focusing on too much range of motion and stretch at the bottom. Almost.
Or just not being able to access a full stretch position very well.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that really ties into mine, which was focusing on too much range of motion or stretch at the bottom. So I think like a really good example of that would be like so the shoulders tipping forward, I think is a good dictation. So like let's start with let's say we're doing a dumbbell chest press, right? Where when we're lowering, a lot of times what you'll see is people just going for as much range of motion as they can possibly get, thinking like more range of motion is always better, like more stretch is always better, I think is typically the thought process there. But yeah, as you said, there will be a point we pass where for us to go any lower, basically what we're just seeing is your scapula, your shoulder blades are really just tipping forward. We're not really getting any further range at the pec. We're not getting any further stretch at the pec. So that's a very, very common one I see is people just going for, is that kind of is that what you were meaning as well?
Yeah, either going for too much range of motion and they've like they've gone beyond now the PECS active range of motion. They're going for just more range of motion for range of motion's sake rather than fully lengthening the pec. Or somebody just doesn't do a good job of lengthening their pecs, and rather than getting into that position, they're compensating by tipping the scapulas, like you said.
Okay, so if you saw that happening, like what would you cue someone to change?
So usually I start out, so like we've talked about, we try and start out with just like very simple cues and create awareness first.
Hmm.
And so usually I'll just say like, hey, we've got your shoulder tipping forward. Let's stop just short of that happening. Or hey, at the bottom, let's try and pull your shoulders apart. And that cue will usually help get them into the right position versus that tipped forward position.
Yeah. That's very common. It's again quite similar. I feel like ours works together so well here. I think like a pec fly, a pec deck is a really good example of this, and most people can probably relate to, where we're in that pec deck, we are flying our hands out. There comes a certain point where if you go back any further, it's not actually us getting a whole lot more range of motion, or more range of motion can only come at the sake of our scapula, our shoulder blades basically just collapsing together. You'll see the same thing a lot of times with when someone's doing a press. And suddenly we're in a lot less stable position. We're a lot less stable at the shoulder joint there as our scaps collapse together. So I don't ever cue, like we don't want to think like we're trying to squeeze our shoulder blades together in a press. I typically like to tell people to think about like keeping a bit of space there. Like you should have some movement there, that's fine. But again, a lot of times we'll see people just blatantly let them just collapse together at the bottom. And we're suddenly so much less stable where the movement is the most difficult, going to be quite hard on the shoulders. But again, same thing in like a pec deck. A lot of times what you'll see is someone, again, we get to the point where, okay, we're here, elbows are probably a bit behind your torso, we have a full stretch on the pec, and then they like let their shoulder blades collapse together. They let their elbows extend to get more range of motion, and we're not actually getting any more lengthening of the pec there. We're basically just putting more stress on our biceps. We're putting our pecs in a less advantageous position to be doing more of the work as we start the concentric portion of the rep. We're basically just putting ourselves in a more vulnerable position and losing some of the tension on the pec. So more range of motion definitely isn't better. It seems like pec training specifically, people just are so focused on the stretch, which training in the lengthened position is great, but you don't want to. We're often like going way outside of that range of motion, active range of motion we actually have access to, and just putting stress on other tissues, which is so often why people who train their pecs a lot also have shoulder pain. Anything else to add there?
Yeah, this is also where I'm really intentional about programming some more like think about them as auxiliary movements. So things that kind of productively put us into some of those positions like shoulder extension. So I know I've touched on this a lot of times, but like a lengthened bicep curl, like I like to put people in those positions or like a bench dip ISO hold or something like that, so that, slowly over time we can build strength in some of these positions and get access to greater ranges of motion so that we have that problem less.
Okay, okay. So kind of like a high cable curl, you said, correct?
No, like a lengthened cable curl.
Oh, like okay, got you. No, I do
Yeah,
like
like
that a
a
lot.
thing or like the inclined dumbbell bicep curl, something like that. Or like
Yeah,
a
yeah.
bench dip ISO hold, stuff like that.
Okay, so explain that there just for the listeners. Like if we are doing like an incline bicep curl or like a face away cable curl, like how does that carry over to better pec training?
It just forces you into like shoulder extension. So we're like practicing things like being in that position and like gaining range of motion like in it within that movement.
Hmm. I love it. Yeah, the pec is a or the bicep is a very important shoulder stabilizer as well. But even like yeah, if you think of like where we're at when we're doing like a face away cable curl or an incline curl, we're quite close to where we would be. We're in shoulder extension, as you said, very similar to where we're at like the bottom of the press.
Right. I like a bench dip ISO hold a lot as well. Where again, like we're just accessing like that
Okay.
extension there. And to Andrea's point, because so many people are spending so much time, in these kind of like internally rotated positions on their phone, on a computer, just like I'm sitting here right now. Like, I just saw an Instagram post from like Gym Fail Nation or something like that, where they were like, my posture at the gym, and it's like these perfectly executed movements, and it's like my posture at home, and it's like a dude in a hoodie with like rounded shoulders, and I was like, I've never related to anything so much. Like I'm doing that right now.
I can relate as well.
Mhm.
What would you say is one of the most common mistakes you're seeing, Natalie?
So to tack on to kind of what you guys are saying, I'm gonna say like improper like rib cage positioning or orientation. So, either like we have a flared rib cage or we are collapsing at the rib cage. Um, most people can benefit from a cue like, hey, chest up, or hey, keep the sternum down, or something like that. And like you said, there's a lot of carryover here to like our lat training and the way we talk about rib cage positioning when it pertains to pec training. But, people who like are overly like flared at the rib cage in their pec training tend to really like AD duct, or I'm sorry, AB duct more. They're like I'm demoing for those of you not watching, but like the super flared arms, right? They've got this like really flared rib cage, and the elbows start flaring out as a result, right? And this is like so stressful, like on your shoulder joints. Um, and then likewise, like people who, collapse, which is kind of what Andrea was speaking to, those are the people that we see tend to be very like delt dominant in their quote pec training, right? So it's like they probably have like really developed like front delts, but they're like, I can't get my pecs to grow. This might be you. So paying attention to ribcage positioning with your pec training can be really important.
And a lot of times as well, even asking what is my goal with this movement. Something that I quite commonly am coaching clients through is, hey, this is an incline press, but your whole butt and lower back, like you're flaring your rib cage so much, you're arching your lower back so much. Like, let's look at where your rib cage actually, it doesn't matter the incline of the bench. If we look at your rib cage positioning, we're flaring so much that we're turning this into a flat press. Just a less stable flat press because your butts and lower back are not at all in contact with the bench because we're trying to flare so much. So important when we're looking at what's the intention with this press? Like, am I trying to target specific divisions? We are like flaring rib cage. Even like the shape of someone's rib cage to a degree can really play a big role in what fibers we're actually biasing. Much more so than just like, is this like a 30-degree incline or a 15-degree incline?
Likewise, in terms of what is the intention here, like if you're listening to this podcast, the intention's not powerlifting, right? So like the intention with powerlifting is to try to get the implement from point A to point B in the most efficient way
Right.
possible. And like we're not necessarily trying to be efficient in that way per se. So like that flared ribcage position that you see a lot of powerlifters do is strategic because they're trying to shorten the distance from point A to point B. And
Also a stronger position,
yeah,
which is why like on an incline press, toward the end of it, people are gassing out and start to fail, and that's when they're flaring their ribs because now we're getting more musculature involved and it's a stronger position. But now it's not an incline press anymore.
Right. And we're trying to, once again, like put the muscles under significant tension. We're not trying to be like the most efficient and just move as much load as possible by any means possible. So I
Perfect.
find myself saying that a lot in my training feedback videos. I'm like, we're not powerlifting here.
Yeah, and presses especially, shoulder press and incline press, really any presses, I see that being one of the most common areas where this like comes up a lot because people just have a tendency to let themselves get very sloppy with their pressing. Andrea, what do you have next?
I think we all kind of had this one in little bit of different wording, so I'm going first and I'm going to take it. Redundant pressing angles. So typically what we'll see with a lot of people's programming coming in is like we're doing a flat press and then like a arms abducted fly and then a machine press with the arms abducted, and it's like we're hitting that exact same angle of arms to the body over and over and over, but we're never doing anything with the elbows in tighter or maybe on an incline. It's all like that exact same pressing like plane.
Okay.
So then
No,
you're not going to get fully develop like a even development in your pecs if you're doing it that way.
Oh, for sure. Like chest day was like barbell flat bench, dumbbell flat bench, pec deck, right? Where we're basically just training that sternal division over and over. Or if it's like decline bench dips, like we're just basically training the same division and the resistance profile is the same. Like it's just just slightly different slightly different implements to train basically the same tissue and like even challenge it the most in the same position of the movement. Very, very common. Um, but I do think that's also again like not just using like lengthen bias movements as well as another area that manifests like again like hey, are we also challenging the tissue more in the short position? Like I'm not just purely doing presses if pec hypertrophy is a goal. If it's not, we might actually just be doing a few presses and that's it. I would say another quite common one I see is excessive elbow flare when pressing, especially if we're trying to bias like the clavicular pec, the upper division of the pec. So if you right now like you flare your elbows straight out to the sides and try to pull them as far back as you can feel right away there you have a lot less range of motion. Versus if you tuck your elbow down about 30 degrees out from your sides, most of you will feel like you can get a lot more range of motion out of the pec. So like for us to be able to fully lengthen the pec, typically like your arms should be more tucked than most people do naturally. Most people are gonna like press it with their elbows flared out quite wide to the sides. We're just not, it's gonna be harder on our shoulders, but also we're just not gonna be able to challenge the pec as well. So most people do really need to tuck their elbows a decent bit more when they are doing most of their presses. Anything else to add on that one from anyone? Or any other common mistakes y'all see?
I think I yeah, like we all kind of were wanting to talk about like redundancy. But I think that goes hand in hand with a lot of the pressing mechanics that we see, in so much as people have a hard time specifically getting their pecs to grow. So they think that the solution is like I'm gonna like throw the kitchen sink at it, like a shotgun approach, right? Like I'm just gonna do like a million different like pressing movements, and then we fall into this redundancy camp when really a lot of the pressing mechanics we're addressing here are usually the roots. So from a
Mm-hmm.
programming perspective standpoint, like even if like this is an area of focus for you, like a couple pressing movements every upper body day is probably pretty good. And then supplementing with some of those things we talked about, like, hey, maybe we are like doing things that, help with shoulder function, which like down the chain are going to improve your pressing mechanics. So it's like instead of just like throwing every which way, like five flat pressing angles, like at you, like with machine cable, this, that, like being a little bit more strategic and like, hey, we really need like a couple really solid movements. And then, like I said, some of those more like tertiary, like down the line, auxiliary kind of movements that will tie into that nicely.
Yeah, and I feel that's so common across all body parts is it's just so easy to just want to throw more. Okay, this thing isn't growing how I want it to. I'm just gonna throw more at it. And that often coincides with you have some degree of pain in the training where eventually you do like, oh, this just doesn't feel good. My shoulders hurt or my lower back hurts when I'm doing my like trying to bias my glutes or whatever it may be. Typically a very good, just as a whole, if it's like, unless we're doing just crazy low volume, and we're probably in a position where we need to focus on improving the execution of these things or the intensity rather than just adding more.
Something else
Um,
listening to, I don't know how many people in our camp subscribe to this, but at least like a few years ago, people wanted to grow their pecs, and so like their first go to was like a barbell bench press.
mhm.
I think that's just like commonly thought of as like the move. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, it's not that zero hypertrophy can occur there, but we could probably, again, have more of a sniper approach to pec training than like a barbell bench. And that is because, dumbbells are freely moving. So we have like a little bit more freedom, like at the wrist and the shoulder joint, which for like shoulder health and therefore like pressing mechanics is going to be a little bit more conducive. We're going to be able to line up the muscle fibers better, according to, what clavicular, if that's kind of what you're doing, or sternal or whatever. But we just have that freedom of motion, and like we're able to get a little bit more of that stretch lengthening of the pec in the bottom position versus like being locked in to this like pronated grip barbell bench press.
Oh yeah. And barbell bench press, barbell incline, and barbell flat press will always hold just a very important place in my heart. But I agree. I
Now
mean,
would be a good time to mention your lifetime PR.
it's 275 for five was my incline press. 335 for three was my flat press PR.
Is this
I
going to be
feel
the clip
about
for social?
yeah. That's it. Thank you for asking. I've been waiting.
You're
I need
welcome.
to make a timestamp quick. Uh, no, but yes, you are just locked in that pronate position, right? Where again, like there's not really anything we can do to manipulate our grip with a barbell. And as you said, bar will hit our chest, which oftentimes mean we can't really fully get to that lengthened position versus what we could achieve with dumbbells, a machine, something of the sort. Now, like I'm still a fan. I would say for the right person, it also really depends on how the person is built. Some people just aren't going to be built well or will have pre-existing issues that don't allow them to like do a barbell press well. More common than not, for some, like a barbell incline press specifically, I'd say I still find it to be a decent option for hypertrophy, depending on what else we have available. Very dependent on what else we have available, but like in a very limited context. Um, but yeah, I would fully agree on that. I think that like letting go of just those barbell movements is a very good idea. Let's talk about then our top four pec movements. Um, Andrea, what's your main, like, what would be your number one you would like to throw out here?
I program an incline dumbbell press for a lot of people.
Hmm.
Um, but honestly, some of that is because it will also hit a little bit of the front delt. And that to me is a little bit more of use in like the hypertrophy context here. Um, but also like whenever it comes to women's programming, which is the majority of our clients, that well, but for men too, like that upper pec is typically what's missing visually. But for women, like obviously there's breast tissue there. We're not going to really like visually see most of the pec tissue, but there is like a little bit of that upper pec that can be visible
Yeah.
that looks aesthetically nice on like an athletic physique.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, I
Jessica?
fully agree. The chesticles are an important part of the physique. Uh, no, for sure. For like I mean, for female clients, which again is the majority of my programming, I think I have more guys than either of you, I think. But, uh, but like a dumbbell incline press will be a staple because, as you said, it's going to give us some front delt. I also, yes, like we're gonna do a good job training the pecs as a whole with a dumbbell incline press, and then at the same time, it is a very good kind of litmus test for shoulder function. Like I think if we're good at like a dumbbell incline press, typically, and we're relatively strong at that, typically we're gonna have quality shoulder function as well. So typically, I'm trying to look at like if I'm programming a pec movement for like female clients, it's typically how can I get like yes, we want to train the pec, but can I also get like another muscle group that we want to bring up and like a good amount of like functional carryover as well. So another that I actually really like, I would say the two most common like pec movements I program for the women is going to be a dumbbell incline press and a dip actually. Um, Dips because it also gives us, I mean, very nice integrated movement. Like we get a good bit of front delt, we get a good bit of tricep as well. So kind of gives us a nice 3 for 1. And also just like a cool, like it's people really enjoy getting strong at it, right? Like I think like getting strong at like getting to where you can do weighted dips is kind of similar to like doing weighted pull-ups. It is a lot more appealing than like, oh, I'm bench pressing the 40-pound dumbbells now instead of 35-pound dumbbells, for most. So I think people like I found like a lot of clients really enjoy that and like the function and like the carry over to the front delts and triceps as well. I like. And again, this is quite a bit different, I would say, than I'm just talking purely hypertrophy for like a male client. Maybe we can touch on that in a bit, but those would be like two big ones for me. What do you got, Natalie?
Just to tack onto that, because I feel like I'm always that person that has to mention, like, even it exposes us into, like, a good shoulder extension, which is, again, like that functional reason I really like a dip. So, like, for a lot of my clients, like, I will end, like, an upper body movement, upper body training day, like, with a dip. Because I like, them ending their day, like, in some kind of extension. But then we get all of those bells and whistles you mentioned as well. So, great bang for your buck there. I would say a flat dumbbell bench, because for all the reasons that we talked through why like a barbell bench might not be, and why we did end up talking about like the, dumbbell bench as a solution there. But to tie everything together a little bit, I have like a flat dumbbell press in a lot of my clients' programming, not necessarily for hypertrophy, but to teach things like scapular function and like shoulder mechanics. So like I have a lot of people and rib cage positioning. So a lot of my clients listening to this know that they have like a hook lying dumbbell bench press where like their feet are up on the bench because it forces them to stack their rib cage over their pelvis, right? So like if they're pressing on a bench and their feet are like on the ground, and someone is like overly like hypermobile, at the rib cage, and we see that rib cage flare, then using a hook lying position, like putting our feet up on the bench, is going to force you to not be able to do that. So for this, and like we've touched on in our other podcasts, a lot of people really suck at shoulder function, and lat training as well. And so we need to be able to teach this like stacked positioning and awareness like around the rib cage. And so I use this as a teaching tool for positioning. Yet we're of course also going to grow from it.
I like that a lot. Yeah. Um, I'm a big fan of a low incline dumbbell press as well. Um, for a female client, do either of y'all find you are programming any short bias pec movements like a cable fly pec deck?
If you doing pec deck,
Okay.
and
Okay.
actually, yeah, and not, I would say not cable fly as much for my
Mhm.
ladies, but I will use like, I know we all use like an alternating cable press for the similar reason that I will do the flat dumbbell bench in the hook lying position,
Okay.
depending on what they have access to. So I use those a little bit interchangeably for that function purpose.
Mhm.
But to answer your original question, Pec Deck, yes, and generally it's like a couple sets, and a lot of it
Okay.
has to do with like what they have access to, and it is a hell of a lot easier to set up than like cable flies for a lot of people. Like
Absolutely. Yeah.
stable, like it's not that hard to line up. Like it really just needs to be like shoulder, elbow, hand, boom, like and you can also teach some awareness there, I think that's a good one for assessing like what's going on at the rib cage too, because I feel like that it becomes apparent very early on, like how they're gonna organize themselves there, like
I
whether
feel like
they're dropping the sternum or they're flaring.
yeah, I feel like it's more obvious in a fly pattern than it is a press pattern.
Mm.
Okay. I like that. Now, I would say on the other side, like if I was programming for a male client where pec hypertrophy is a priority, I mean, in general, I would probably want at least one very stable incline press. So, like, of course, I love like a prime. If you have like access to like the prime plate loaded press, then that's, I think, like my all-time favorite pec piece of equipment. But some type of like machine press, I would for sure want. Typically, like most are going to be lacking in the clavicular pec, so I'm typically trying to bias that region more. It would typically be like one more short bias movement across the week at very least for that division. So think like that might be your machine press, that might be, or if we have like two like more lengthened bias options, like if we had like a prime press and then like a dumbbell incline press or like a bar or like a Smith machine incline press, both great options there as well. But worst case, it might be, hey, maybe we're doing like a Smith machine incline press and then like a cable clavicular press, right? Where I do want two typical movements that are typically biasing that more. And then one that's going to be a little bit more of that like external division specific. I really do like, again, like either a low incline, probably would be like a dumbbell low incline. I do really like, get a lot of the similar benefits of like that incline press, but again, get a little bit more of the lower divisions of the pec there as well. And for sure, some type of fly, like a pec deck cable fly. And realistically, I would still probably have like a dip in that training week as well. But again, that's kind of two part with like the tricep and like that causal pec carryover that we're getting there. Anything else y'all would add there? Or anything else on pecs? Chesticles.
I do want to give a shout out to N1 because I do really like their philosophy and breakdown on like why we would program certain divisions and why we might not.
Hmm.
So, the discussion of like, is it always a good idea to, hey, like I want to do like a sternal press, for example, because with sternal, like you're going to get some carryover to clavicular too, right? Like it's never going to be like exclusively one or the other.
That's a
Uh,
good shout that I should have brought up. Yeah.
but I like that discussion because it is one that begs for context of the program, right? It's never like this is the best movement that you should include. It's like what
Hmm.
does the rest of your program look like? And like for our ladies, that like this is the reason that incline does make sense because it is like we get a good bang for your buck there. Like between like some clavicular and front delt, yes, but like a little sternal as well kind of thing versus like probably not gonna like give my ladies like a costal fly, like cable fly or something. I mean, never say never, for sure. But again, I think within the algorithm of your programming, that's where you have room to kind of like, I think you can be smart with it so that you don't fall into the camp where you start like, okay, now I'm going to have like a clavicular press and I'm going to have a sternal press and I'm going to have a costal press. Like that's in my experience like pretty unnecessary, especially like for our demographic, which again is mostly ladies who are not necessarily looking for like a pec specialty phase. We don't need to be that granular, but that's where we can kind of like take a more omni approach and kind of mix and match a little bit. So
It's a very good shout. Quite similar to what we discussed with the pecs, or excuse me, the lats, where we kind of broke it down to like, hey, if we do a
yeah,
horizontal pull and a vertical pull, we're probably training everything quite well. And we might want to think through like, do you just have like weird looking pecs where the top half is completely flat and then you just have like a weird like bottom half of a boob down here because the bottom part of your pec's so well developed, speaking to like a man?
the
Okay,
underboob.
maybe yeah, you just got this weird under boob. Maybe we do want to like train at like a two. Maybe we are going to like be intentional about biasing more of our volume towards those clavicular divisions to just drive a little bit more stimulus there. But even if we're doing like an incline press, we're still going to train the entire pec quite well. So it is like the nuances are fun to talk about, but yes, it is. There's a lot of carryover with all the entire pec.
I think more people like think that that's what they need, and the longer that I'm in this game, the more you realize that like, man, we're talking like elite level bodybuilders that you need to be concerned with like the specific divisions.
Hmm.
Like in terms of, strategic programming, like that's someone at the highest level where it's like we need to bring up this specific fiber. If you're someone who's like lacking in a certain area like upper middle lower lat or upper middle lower pec, I'd say 9 times out of 10 it's probably an execution problem.
I would
So
agree.
like it is really fun to nerd out and talk about it, but like to your point, Jeremiah, with the lats, with the pressing, like if we have a vertical, if we have something a little bit more horizontal, something in between, probably covering a lot of bases there.
I think that it's very easy to. I even feel like this is like what I'm working on in my own training right now to a degree is just like continuing to master the basics and like there's so much more room to still get better at those even in like the last year like my lat training and my pec training which I thought was like such a strength of mine I've found out is not nearly as even like this last week like my lat training I just like had I feel like has improved so much and like I thought I was really good at it for the longest time and I've realized I actually sucked at it but
That
there's still
explains,
like what's that.
that explains so much.
Right. And so for you guys understand now, but I will get jacked now. But truly, I think it is like it's quite common for a client to come on board and like, well, I really think I just need to bring up like my upper glute max specifically is like what I need to build or, like very like niche specializations. And it's like realistically from the physique you're showing me you want to get from where we are, we just need to build muscle across the board. And it's not like we need like this iliac glute specialization phase yet. We need to get better at everything with like consistency, training, execution, intensity. And like a couple years from now, maybe we'll be to that point. or we might still not be there. But I think that's a very good shout. Anything else from y'all before we wrap this up? All right. Well, if you want some big old chesticles, this episode will be helpful. As always, thank you guys for tuning in. If you want to apply to work with the team, hit the link in the show notes, and we will catch you guys next time.